It all started when Tessa received that promotion. Apex Solutions, the financial company where she'd been working for the last 5 years, had always been a place of ambition for her. She had fought hard to get to where she was, starting out as an analyst and slowly climbing the ranks. She was smart, driven, and had a knack for solving complex financial problems. I respected that about her. Hell, I even admired it. She'd been aiming for the senior analyst position for months. I knew she wanted it more than anything, but I never expected how much it would change her. When she finally got the promotion, it was like a switch flipped in her. She came home that night with a sparkle in her eye and a smile that I hadn't seen in weeks. "You won't believe it," she said, holding up the email that confirmed her promotion. "I did it, Ryan. I'm a senior analyst now." I was proud of her, of course. Who wouldn't be? But there was something in her tone, something that didn't quite sit right with me. She was giddy, yes, but there was an edge to it, a kind of nervous energy. And the way she talked about it, it wasn't just a career milestone. It was as if something more was at stake. That night, we were supposed to go out for dinner, just the two of us. It had been a while since we'd had time for ourselves, what with her long hours at the office and me trying to juggle my own work. But she canceled. Said there was some important meeting with her boss, Edward Mercer, to discuss the promotion. I could feel a tightness in my chest, the familiar knot of frustration. It wasn't just that she canceled our plans. It was the way she did it, with that forced smile, and the way she kept brushing me off, like I wasn't even there. "You've been working too much lately," I said, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. "Maybe you should take a break, Tessa. It's okay to relax a little." She waved me off. "You don't understand, Ryan. This is a big opportunity. I can't afford to mess it up. You know how important this is to me." I nodded, but deep down, I felt the distance growing between us. There was no us anymore, it seemed. There was just her, focused, driven, and unreachable. And me, standing on the sidelines, watching it all slip away. The next few weeks were a blur of long hours for her at the office. I barely saw her. When I did, she was distracted, distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. I'd try to talk to her, to ask about her day, but she'd just brush it off. "I'm tired, Ryan. Can we talk about this later? I have a lot to do." I couldn't help but feel like I was losing her, but I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't want to be the controlling husband, always asking questions or complaining about her work. But something in the back of my mind told me that there was more going on than just late nights at the office. It all came to a head one night when she had canceled yet another dinner. I had planned it for weeks, thinking we could finally reconnect, but she had important tasks to finish. She promised we'd make it up later, but the words felt hollow. As I walked past the living room, I overheard her on the phone. "You're doing it right. This is an important step for you," she said, her voice soft, almost too intimate. My blood ran cold. The voice on the other end of the line, Ed's. I'd heard that name too many times in passing to mistake it. Edward Mercer, her boss. The one who had helped her climb the ranks, who seemed to take an unnatural interest in her success. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, listening to her talk. She was laughing at something he'd said, her voice light, almost flirtatious. "Thanks for all your help, Ed. I really appreciate it." My stomach turned. She wasn't just talking to him as a colleague, as a boss. She was talking to him like he was more than that. I wanted to confront her right there, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stepped back, quietly, and retreated to the kitchen. My heart was racing, and my mind was spinning. I didn't know what to do with the knowledge I had just gained. Was it all in my head? Was I overreacting? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't the type to follow her around, to keep tabs on her. I never was the jealous type. But now, I couldn't help myself. I started noticing little things, things that felt off. Her phone was always on silent when she was around me. She'd snap at me when I tried to ask about her day. She'd stay later at work, sometimes even on weekends. It was like I didn't exist anymore. And the more she pulled away, the more I felt like I was losing her to someone else, someone I couldn't compete with. I tried to talk to her about it, but it never went anywhere. "Tessa, I don't know what's going on, but this isn't us. We used to be close. What happened?" I asked one night, my voice cracking with frustration. She just sighed, exasperated. Ryan, I told you. I'm busy. This promotion is everything. I can't just drop everything for you right now. And then, she went silent, staring at her phone. That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just silence. I was standing there, completely alone in that moment, watching the woman I loved slip further and further away from me. I didn't know what to do anymore. All I could do was watch and wait. But I wasn't blind. I saw the way Ed looked at her when they worked together. I saw the way she looked at him, too, like she was grateful for everything he had done for her. Maybe it was all innocent. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening between them. Something I didn't have a part in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation I'd overheard, trying to make sense of it. Was she just being overly friendly with her boss, or was there something more to it? I didn't know, but I would find out. It's strange how quickly everything can change. One moment, I was celebrating the promotion I'd worked so hard for, and the next, I was tangled in a web of confusion and uncertainty. I had always prided myself on my ability to keep things professional. My work, my family, the balance between them. But with Ed's constant presence in my life, that balance was beginning to crumble. It started innocently enough. At first, it was just a few corporate events that Ed invited me to. He would phrase it as if it were essential for the business, for the company's reputation. Of course, I didn't think twice about it. I was flattered by the recognition, by his belief in my potential. But soon, those invitations started to feel less like professional necessity and more like something personal. You know, Tessa, Ed said one evening at a dinner meeting, his eyes lingering a little too long on mine. Career success isn't just about promotions. It's about the connections you make, the relationships you build. You have the potential to go far, but that's only possible if you're willing to push yourself beyond the ordinary. I nodded, not sure where this conversation was heading. We were discussing the future of the company, the next steps for the team, but somehow, the talk always circled back to me. He'd compliment me on my work, but then there'd be those subtle hints, those moments where he seemed to imply that I could achieve so much more if I just opened myself up to more than just business. You're so driven, Tessa, he continued, leaning forward just a little too closely. You could be more than just a senior analyst. Think about what you could accomplish if you weren't just focused on your job. Maybe we could work together more closely. I could help you reach your potential. My heart raced, and I forced a smile, unsure of how to respond. Was he complimenting me? Or was he trying to convince me of something else? I couldn't tell, but it was starting to feel like he wanted more than just my professional respect. Back at home, things weren't any better. I was drowning in work, constantly putting in late hours at the office, while Ryan grew more distant. He kept trying to plan romantic dinners, to make time for us, but I was always too busy. The harder he tried, the more I pushed him away. I don't understand, Tessa, Ryan said one night, his voice thick with frustration. We used to make time for each other. Now it's like I don't even exist to you. I'm doing this for us, Ryan, I snapped, avoiding his gaze as I stared at my phone. I need to prove myself. I need to prove that I'm good enough for this. For this career. It felt like a lie even as I said it. I wasn't just doing this for us anymore. I was doing this for me. For the validation, for the recognition, for the feeling of power that came with success. But the more I threw myself into my work, the more I felt like I was losing him. And then there was Ed. One evening, after another long meeting, Ed and I were left alone in the office. The place was quiet, the lights dimming as the late hours stretched on. He stood up from his desk, walking over to me slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. I could feel my pulse quicken. I should have said something, should have ended it right then and there. But instead, I just stood there, frozen. You know, Tessa, Ed said softly, his voice like velvet, I really admire your drive. It's rare to find someone as focused as you. I can't help but think we could accomplish great things together. Before I could respond, he stepped closer. There was no turning back now. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a soft, tentative kiss. It wasn't a passionate kiss, nothing like that. But it was enough to stir something in me, enough to make me question everything. I pulled away quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. I shouldn't have done that, I stammered. my mind racing. Ed just smiled, his expression unreadable. You don't have to explain. But sometimes, Tessa, you need to take chances. You need to see things from a different perspective. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. I told myself it didn't mean anything. It was just a kiss, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. It was the first crack in my own resolve, the first step towards something I wasn't ready to admit to myself. The next day, I tried to push it out of my mind. I tried to focus on the work ahead, on the projects I had to finish, on the new clients I had to impress. But then Thomas Bennett came into the picture. Thomas was a major client, someone I'd been working with for a few months. He was older, successful, and incredibly charming. He always had a way of making me feel important, like I was the center of his attention. It felt good, too good sometimes, to be the one he sought out for advice. It was flattering in a way that I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, after a meeting, he pulled me aside. You know, Tessa, I'm really impressed with what you're doing here, he said, his eyes lingering on mine. You've got a good head on your shoulders. I'm curious, though, what about your personal life? You're so focused on your career. Don't you want to have a life outside of work? I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. Well, my personal life isn't really that interesting. Really? He asked, leaning closer, his tone almost conspiratorial. Because I think someone as driven as you deserves more than just a job. You deserve someone who can appreciate that. Maybe you just haven't found the right person yet. His words stuck with me long after the meeting ended. He wasn't the only one who was beginning to show interest, though. Christian Moore, the company's lawyer, had also started paying more attention to me. He would stop by my office more often, offering help with legal matters or just trying to make small talk. At first, I thought it was just friendly, but the more he did it, the more I began to realize that it was something more. Between Ed, Thomas, and Christian, I felt trapped. Each of them had a hand in shaping my future, but none of them had any interest in my personal life. They didn't care about my marriage or my relationship with Ryan. All they cared about was what I could do for them, what I could do for my career. And that's when I started to feel it, the pressure. My colleagues began to look at me with suspicion, whispering behind my back about my sudden rise to the top. The promotion was no longer just something I could be proud of. It was a symbol of something darker, something people were beginning to question. I couldn't help but feel like I was standing on the edge, caught between two worlds. One was my career, the other was my marriage. But both were slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I should have known it would come to this. The moment I let Ed's attention slip past the professional barrier, I was already lost. The problem was, I didn't realize how deeply I was entangled until it was too late. By then, I was already part of something much darker than just a few whispered conversations and innocent meetings. At first, it had been thrilling. Ed's influence, his compliments, the way he seemed to care about my career. He made me feel powerful, like I was finally seen. I thought I was in control of everything. But now, looking back, I can see it for what it really was, manipulation. I wasn't just climbing the corporate ladder anymore. I was being used as a pawn in Ed's bigger game. It wasn't about my success anymore. It wasn't about me being a senior analyst, or even achieving more promotions. No, it was about something else entirely. I had become an essential part of Ed's plan. A plan to gain access to sensitive company data, to influence key employees, to manipulate the entire corporate structure to suit his needs. I didn't know exactly how deep it went, but I started to realize that the promotions, the attention, everything was part of a strategy. I had helped him make inroads with the board of directors, had secured high-profile clients, and had unwittingly signed off on decisions that gave him leverage over company assets and key figures within the company. All the while, I thought I was just helping myself, climbing, achieving. But the truth was, Ed had been pulling my strings the entire time. He was charming, persuasive, and so incredibly patient. Every meeting, every intimate dinner, every late-night conversation, it was all part of the plan. At first, I convinced myself that I could handle it, that I could separate my personal life from my professional ambitions. But now, I was so far gone that I didn't know where one ended and the other began. I should have felt guilty, but instead, I found myself craving his approval. There was power in it. It was a heady feeling. the kind that makes you forget about everything else, even the people who cared about you. I had let myself get so lost in this world of manipulation that the guilt didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was what Ed could give me, and what I could give him. Ryan, meanwhile, was starting to notice. It was like he'd been sleeping unaware, and now his eyes were opening to the truth. He'd begun finding strange messages on my phone, cryptic, seemingly innocent exchanges between me and Ed, but they were enough to raise suspicion. I didn't think anything of it at first, but when I saw the look in his eyes, the doubt creeping in, I knew he was piecing it all together. I tried to keep the distance. I kept brushing him off, telling him I was busy, that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, and he could see it. One night, I came home to find him sitting in the living room, his phone in his hand, his face pale. "Tessa, what is this?" he asked, his voice shaky. He showed me the message on his screen, one of the many I'd exchanged with Ed. It wasn't anything incriminating, but the words carried an undertone I couldn't deny. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, hoping my voice didn't crack. Ryan's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just business anymore, is it? What's going on between you two, Tessa?" I couldn't answer him. The truth was, I didn't know where the lines blurred anymore. Ed had taken something from me, something I couldn't get back. And it wasn't just my marriage. It was my sense of who I was, my independence. I didn't know how to lie to Ryan anymore, and I didn't know how to face him. So, I did what I always did. I shut down. I turned away and threw myself back into work, back into Ed's world, where everything felt so much easier. There, at least, I could pretend that everything had a purpose. But things weren't so easy at work either. The more I rose, the more people began to notice. Nicole Sanders, a manager from another department, started asking me questions about my promotion. She'd been in the company long enough to know the politics, and she was no fool. "You've moved up fast, Tessa," she said one day in the break room. "Something doesn't sit right with me about all this. I know how it works. He's persuasive, isn't he?" I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "It's just hard work, Nicole. That's all." But she wasn't buying it. "Just be careful, okay? People like Ed, they don't do things without a reason. I've seen it before. He doesn't give anything away for free." That was the first time I began to realize that others were watching me, questioning me. The whispers had already started, and I couldn't stop them. The very thing I had worked so hard for, my success, was now a source of suspicion. It wasn't just Nicole. Other colleagues were starting to talk behind my back. They saw how quickly I'd advanced, how much power I had, and they didn't trust it. They didn't trust me. I started feeling like an outsider in my own company. I had worked so hard to be part of the inner circle, but now I was the subject of gossip, the target of judgment. My career, which had once felt like my personal achievement, had become the very thing that made me feel alone. And as if all that wasn't enough, there was Kate Bryson, a therapist I'd started seeing to help with the emotional strain of everything. At first, I thought it would help, someone to talk to, someone to help me make sense of it all. But Kate had her own agenda. She was kind at first, understanding even, helping me navigate my anxiety, listening to my frustrations. But then, it started to change. She'd ask probing questions about my career, my relationship with Ed, about Ryan. Slowly, I began to feel like I was the one being analyzed, manipulated. It wasn't just therapy anymore. It felt like she was trying to steer me towards certain decisions, trying to make me see things from a different angle. "Ed isn't just a boss, Tessa," she would say, her voice soft, almost coaxing. "He's a mentor, and you need to decide how you want to handle that. You've come so far, but are you willing to sacrifice everything for it?" I didn't know how to answer her. I didn't know how to answer anyone anymore. I felt trapped by Ed, by my career, by my own desires. But what could I do? I was already in too deep, and every step I took toward the surface only seemed to drag me further under. The more I tried to distance myself from Ed, the more he pulled me back in. His pressure was relentless, and I realized, with a sickening clarity, that there was no way out. I was caught in a game, one that I hadn't signed up for, and it was a game that was already too far gone for me to win. I never thought I'd find myself here, in this twisted mess of lies, manipulation, and revenge. But once the pieces started to fall into place, there was no turning back. Ryan was no longer the man I had married. The shock of discovering my affair didn't just break him. It ignited something in him, something darker. I had thought that when he found out, he'd be devastated, lost in his own sorrow. But instead, he became focused, calculating. If he was going to lose everything, so was I. I should have seen it coming, but I was too caught up in trying to salvage my career, my image, and somehow, even my twisted connection with Ed. The more I tried to pull away, the more tangled I became. Ryan wasn't just looking for revenge anymore. He wanted to dismantle everything I had worked for, everything I had built with Ed. He didn't have to go far. He had connections, people who knew things, people who understood the politics of the company. That's how he found Vincent Carey, a senior analyst who had always been a little too observant. Vincent had started to notice the shady dealings happening behind closed doors, things that no one else seemed to catch. Vincent was no fool, and he knew exactly what was happening. He didn't care about my affair, but he did care about what Ed was doing. And soon, Vincent shared everything he knew with Ryan. Ed's illegal financial dealings, his manipulations within the company, the way he had used people like me to climb higher and higher while hiding his tracks. The more Ryan learned, the more power he gained. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was methodical, cold. He knew exactly how to use this information to his advantage. And he wasn't going to let me off easy. He wasn't going to settle for making me feel guilty or hurt. No, he wanted to destroy Ed and everything I had built with him. I had no idea what Ryan was doing behind the scenes. All I knew was that work was becoming increasingly tense. Whispers about me and Ed were growing louder. The promotion that had once been a cause for celebration now felt like a burden. People at the company were questioning my rise, and rumors were spreading like wildfire. It was when I overheard a conversation between two colleagues that I began to understand just how much power Ryan had started to wield. They were talking about financial discrepancies, about how certain numbers weren't adding up, and how someone had leaked that information to the board. My name was mentioned in hushed tones, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. The leaks were intentional. Ryan was playing his cards, quietly pulling strings. But there was more. I hadn't been prepared for this part. Ryan had started manipulating my emotions, using me in ways I hadn't expected. He had become a master at pulling me in, then pushing me away. He began to tell anyone who would listen about the difficult relationship we had, about how I had changed, how distant I had become. It was all lies, but it worked. Linda Parks, a young and ambitious colleague, began showing an interest in Ryan, a curiosity that only fueled the fire. I could see it happening. He was trying to make me jealous, trying to push me to the edge. It worked. The more I saw Linda hanging around him, the more I questioned my choices, and the more I felt myself slipping into despair. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. Ed sensed the growing threat. He was always one step ahead, and when he realized that his hold over me was weakening, he acted quickly. One afternoon, after a tense meeting, I was summoned to his office. I tried to stay calm, but as soon as I entered, I knew something was wrong. "Sit down, Tessa," he said, his voice low and controlled. "We need to talk." I didn't know what was coming, but I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. Ed leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed. "You've been trying to distance yourself from me," he continued, a smile creeping up his face. "But that's not an option anymore. You're too deep in this. If you try to walk away now, I'll expose everything. Your affair, your involvement in my dealings. The board will hear all of it." I froze. It was as if the room had closed in around me. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. "Don't even try to pretend, Tessa. You're trapped. I own you now. If you want to keep your career, your reputation, and your future intact, you'll stay loyal to me. I've helped you get to where you are, and I can tear it all down in an instant." I felt the walls closing in. My entire life was crashing down around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had no choice but to agree, to continue playing his game. If I tried to expose him, I'd lose everything. My career, my dignity, my future. But if I stayed, I was complicit in his crimes. In that moment, I realized how far I had fallen. My desire for success had led me here, into this twisted world of blackmail, manipulation, and lies. I had become everything I once despised. Ryan's manipulation didn't stop there. As I tried to repair the fractured parts of my relationship with him, he kept pushing. He would say things that made me believe there was still hope, that we could rebuild. But I knew better now. It was all part of his plan, his strategy to destroy me. And he wasn't alone. Mark Richardson, a senior executive at Apex Solutions, had long suspected Ed's wrongdoing. After hearing rumors about me and Ed, he started digging into Ed's financial activities. Mark, unbeknownst to me, had formed an alliance with Ryan, and together, they were working to take Ed down. Then there was Gina McAllister, a journalist who had caught wind of the problems at Apex. She had been investigating corporate corruption, and somehow, she had learned about the mess I was entangled in. Gina was my only hope of exposing Ed's crimes, but the risk was immense. If I reached out to her, I would be digging my own grave. The truth was dangerous, and the consequences could be devastating. I was stuck in the middle, a pawn between two powerful men, each playing their own game. The more I tried to escape, the tighter the noose around me became. I couldn't win. I couldn't fight back. I was trapped in a web of lies, blackmail, and manipulation. And the only question that remained was how far this would go before everything I had built came crashing down. Ryan's plan had always been meticulous, and now it had reached its devastating peak. What started as a personal vendetta had transformed into a perfect storm. A storm that, once unleashed, would tear everything I had built apart. I had never imagined it would come to this, but in the end, it wasn't just my betrayal that sealed my fate. It was the way I had let everything fall into chaos, willingly or not. With Mark Richardson's help, Ryan had gathered irrefutable evidence of Ed's criminal activities. Mark had long suspected something wasn't right, and after months of quietly investigating, he found the smoking gun. Financial discrepancies, insider trading, and illegal dealings that tied Ed's rise to power with every unethical and illegal practice imaginable. Ryan used his position, his connections, to leak the information to the company's legal department. Once that evidence was in the hands of the right people, there was no turning back. Ed, once the golden boy of Apex Solutions, was forced to step down. His empire crumbled in a matter of days, and his criminal activities were exposed to the public in a scandal that rocked the company to its core. But as the walls closed in around Ed, they also closed in on me. I had been part of the system, a key player in his rise, and now, with his fall, my reputation was buried under the rubble. I lost my job. My career was destroyed. All the ambition, all the sacrifices I had made to get to the top, none of it mattered anymore. I was left with nothing but the wreckage of my own choices. In my desperation, I turned to Ryan. I sought his forgiveness, hoping he might offer me the support I so desperately needed. I had nothing left, but Ryan had changed. The man I had known, the man who had once loved me, was gone. In his place was a man who had triumphed, who had taken his revenge and gained everything he had ever wanted. He was cold, distant, and indifferent. "You made your choices, Tessa," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You chose him. You chose power. You can't just walk back into my life now." I couldn't argue with him. He was right. I had chosen power. I had sacrificed everything for it, including the one person who had always loved me unconditionally. Ryan was now untouchable, his career flourishing as mine had crumbled. He had secured his place in the company, and his revenge had not only succeeded, it had made him stronger. I felt like I was drowning. The life I had fought so hard to build was slipping through my fingers, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, it was gone. And with it, so was the love of my life. The man who had been my partner, my equal, now saw me as nothing more than a liability. But my desperation didn't end there. I turned to Kate Bryson, my therapist, hoping she could help me piece together the broken fragments of my soul. But Kate, ever the manipulator herself, seized the opportunity to push me further into the mindset that had caused all my mistakes in the first place. "You need to reclaim your life, Tessa," she said, her voice smooth but sharp. "Focus on what you can control. Don't think about what you've lost. Think about how you can rise again. You have the skills, the charm, the ambition. You can rebuild yourself. just like before. Her words were poison, and I didn't even see it. She wasn't guiding me toward healing. She was feeding the very obsession with success that had destroyed me in the first place. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could somehow claw my way back into a position of power, regain my reputation, and put my life back together. But the truth was that it was already too late. In a final, desperate attempt to right the wrongs I had done, I decided to expose Ed. I thought that if I could tell the truth, if I could reveal what had really happened, maybe I could salvage something from the wreckage. But before I could act, Gina McAllister, the journalist who had been quietly investigating corporate corruption, had already gotten wind of the scandal. She had pieced everything together and released the story to the media. The public humiliation was swift and unforgiving. My affair with Ed, my involvement in his crimes, everything was out in the open, and there was no escaping it. The scandal erupted across every news outlet, and the company's stock price plummeted. No one trusted me anymore. My name had become synonymous with betrayal and corruption, and no matter what I did, I couldn't erase the stain. And Ryan? He was done with me. The betrayal had been too much. The man who had once cared for me, who had once believed in us, now saw me as nothing more than a shadow of the woman I used to be. He didn't need me anymore. He had everything he had ever wanted: success, respect, power, and he had done it all without me. My marriage was beyond repair. I had ruined it with my own hands. Ryan was cold, indifferent, and had no room for me in his life. His career flourished, but my soul withered. I left the company, unable to face the whispers that followed me everywhere. Every step I took felt like a reminder of everything I had lost. I tried to find solace in new ventures, new opportunities, but the truth was, no matter where I went, my reputation followed. The shadow of my mistakes loomed over me. I was no longer the ambitious, career-driven woman I had once been. I was a cautionary tale, a warning for others to never get too close to power, to ambition, to betrayal. And then there was Ryan. He had one. His career was everything he had ever dreamed of, and he had the respect of everyone around him. He had destroyed me, and yet, he had lost me in the process. As he stood at the top, surveying his newfound success, he realized something. The victory wasn't as sweet as he had imagined. There was no joy in revenge. There was no satisfaction in seeing me crumble. He had what he wanted, but it had cost him more than he could have ever anticipated. In the end, I was left alone, living in the aftermath of my choices. I had lost the man I loved, my career, and my sense of self. The journey I had been on had brought me to a bitter end, but it was also the beginning of something else. I didn't know what that something was, but I knew it would be a long road to recovery, a road that I might never fully travel, but one I had to take, for the sake of finding peace within myself. And so, with no career, no relationship, and no clear path ahead, I began again, one small step at a time.